Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with Brandy Colbert and Becky Albertalli here tonight. We are here in celebration of The Voting Booth, which is Brandy's brand new book, hot off the presses. There it is in its galley form. Special version, but the version we'll be sending out to you very soon is a hardback, and it's available to order right now via this little teal button at the bottom of your screen. So you can click on that if you don't have your book yet and go ahead and get it in the mail. We're really excited. We've really been big fans of Brandy's work for a long time. And this book is something that we feel like is the perfect summer read because it's a mix of some romance, some diverting elements. It's a good beach read, even if your beach is in your backyard right now. But it also is super relevant for the moment, thinking about voting rights, thinking about voter disenfranchisement, and things that, are where people are in the streets about right now. So I'm thrilled, as always, to have Becky with us. We just got to do a wonderful event with Becky celebrating more Simon verse excitement and more. So if you don't have your copy of Love Creekwood, let us know. We can hook you up with that. But I'm just excited for y'all to have sort of a free-ranging conversation around the voting booth and the state of YA and all the things. So if y'all have questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the Ask a Question area, which is at the bottom center of your screen. You can just start asking questions now for Brandy. You also can chime in the chat and say where you're from. Say if you have a favorite book of Brandy's that you've already read, you can chime in on that. Anything you want to say, go ahead and keep the conversation going. So please welcome Brandy and Becky. So glad to have y'all here.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here. And Becky, thank you so much for doing this with me.
My pleasure. I'm extremely excited and honored to be here. I think it's probably obvious from not even just the first time I met you. I feel like it was maybe the first 2 times I met you, and I just was a fangirling mess. Yeah, I think you're amazing. And
well, same, very much same. We're just gonna do this the whole hour, so guys, get ready.
So, just like keep going back and forth with this the whole time. So I have like a bunch of questions. Like if I look down, I'm not like texting. I have like my notebook.
I believe you.
Well, I wanted to like, before diving into the voting booth, which like we're not going to get through this event without at some point me just having to like break down and gush about it. I have lies like that book like hits different in 2020, especially if you're from Georgia. So I will come back to that in a second. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to make sure everybody here is aware of like your backlist and just how many incredible books you have written in what I didn't realize. So Point was your debut, but I didn't realize that was 2014.
Yeah, it was 6 years ago. So The Voting Booth is my 6th book, and then my debut came out 6 years ago, and I realized that I was like, whoa, it's been wild. So Point is my debut. A lot of people think Little and Lion is my debut. I switched publishers after Point, and then sort of I feel like, people started to know more and more about me after Little and Lion, but I'm super proud of Point. It's still available in paperback. So yeah, that's my baby.
Yeah, gosh, it's so like, I mean, and it is remarkable. Like as as somebody who is a very disorganized and slow writer, and like you have like very consistently released like basically like 1 a year of these like award-winning, like because Little Lion racked up Stonewall, like just like starred reviews everywhere, and just these, I don't know, just these absolutely game-changing books that have made a lot of people feel seen.
Thank you.
Yeah, just, you know, a heads up everybody too. Like, I want you to pick up the voting booth ASAP, and while you're there, get Brandy's backlist.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I want to dive into this beautiful book with the in art form.
I know.
But I want to start and just have you give like the elevator pitch for the voting booth.
Yeah. So for some reason, I feel better when I'm holding the book and I talk about it. So the voting booth is, you know, like lost without holding the book. The voting booth is about these two kids, Marva over here and Duke over here. It's told through both dual points of view. So you get to hear from both of them throughout the story. And basically they meet, it starts at the very beginning of election day and they meet at the polls. Marva has voted. It's like the one thing she's like basically waited her whole life to do. She's been politically involved since, you know, way before she was 18, but this is her first election and that she can vote in, same as Duke. And she sees him get turned away after she's cast her vote, and she inserts herself. She's very type A. She's very organized, like very like, I'm going to get things done, including helping this guy vote. So he's a complete stranger and she just inserts herself into his life. And then they go on this like whirlwind journey of a day. They end up skipping school because they decide that their civic responsibility is more important than Duke's calculus test. So I'm not telling anyone to skip school, but these kids thought it was important. And yeah, they just get to know each other over the day, and they have a lot of important conversations about, you know, the state of the world and why voting is important to them. So while Marva has been, you know, felt like she's involved politically like her whole life, Duke comes from a pretty political family, and he has, I don't think this is too, I think this is in the cover copy, so I could say that he has an activist brother who passed away a couple years ago, and so he feels like part of his duty of honoring his brother is to vote. So they kind of, and then there's like an internet famous cat that goes missing, and Marva is dealing with her ex-boyfriend, so there's all kinds of like off the page stuff happening too.
Yeah. And one of the things I love so much about this book is it's so high concept. Like it's almost like right now it's like an electrifying concept, but the book itself is so character driven. Like and even the kind of conflict that you set up at the beginning is so like, you know so much about Marva and Duke just from the way you pitched it, where it's just like she steps in, like she sees that he's getting turned away and she's gonna make this happen, and he's like, you know, like it's complicated for him in ways that are very personal and tied to trauma and kind of political engagement and activism. And so I guess I wanted to first I want to talk about Marva first, because she's like she's one of my favorite YA characters ever.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
oh my God, thank you.
She's like I don't know, I just like, she has a very, very strong voice, but also I just, you know, she reminds me a lot of real teens I know, just in her just, you know, just very strong sense of civic responsibility, like passion, engagement. It feels very, you know, it's just, she's one of those characters who reminds me so much more of Gen Z kids than the teens that I grew up with, like the exennial teens. And that was apparent right away. And I love that. And I wanted to know kind of, you know, was that something intentional, you know, kind of in terms of like observing kind of just that, you know, just some of that energy that we're seeing from Gen Z right now, 2020.
Yeah. So yeah, I was a teenager in the 90s, and like I was telling someone the other day, maybe at another event, that I thought sort of, I grew up in a really conservative area in the Midwest, in the Missouri Ozarks, if anyone is familiar with that. And so, you know, I didn't even think people were still protested in the 90s. Like I thought that was something that went away in the 60s because nobody was protesting like in my hometown. And, you know, my friends were certainly not politically engaged. Like we were very like I voted for the first time I was able to vote, which was in the 2000 election, and I was 21. But I did it because I knew I was supposed to, not because I was like, really educated about the issues or anything. But today's teens are, and I remember also, I mentioned Rock the Vote the other day in an event, and I mentioned them in an article too, and then they tweeted at me a couple days ago, and I almost completely lost it, because that's the most like that I remember sort of teens being involved with in the 90s was like, I remember, sitting in front of MTV all day and like watching that and seeing like Rock the Vote. And like, that was probably the most like engaged I was outside of like watching the news with my parents or something. But today's teens are like doing it for themselves, like starting their own initiatives. Like I know like Yara Shahidi, the actress from Blackish, she had like, what was it, 18 by 18. And it was like, trying to get so many young folks registered by 2018 to vote in the midterms. And I just feel like, and then there's like Greta Thunberg, who's like the climate change activist. And there's the kids from, I'm going to get the name of the school wrong, but in Florida.
The Parkland kid. Parkland?
Thank you. Yes.
Now I'm pushing it.
That sounds right. Who did like the gun control. So there's like, I feel like there's so many different teens with addressing so many different current concerns. And I just feel like I know there were teens doing that when I was a teenager, but it doesn't seem, of course, we didn't have social media like we do now, but it just seems like it is this sort of, I feel like it skips maybe some generations once like generations have fought and fought. So my parents are, young boomers. And so their generation was like, the ones that were out like protesting and fighting for change and doing sit-ins and all of that. And then I think once people get comfortable, then it sort of feels like, okay, we could sort of rest. And I, sadly, like I'm like late Gen X. And I feel like that was sort of our like, well, they've already fought for us. Like we don't have to do too much. And, there were definitely people doing it, but widespread, I don't think it looked the way it does today. And I'm just so like inspired by that. So it was really cool to write a teenager who, has wanted to use her voice to make change since she was a kid. Like she's like on this path probably to politics herself. But, even if she isn't, she's not sure exactly, but she's like, it's just important to me to try to do what I can. I think teens today are also sort of more aware of these greater issues. Like I had never heard of climate change in the 90s. It was certainly something that had been talked about and that, they were discussing, but I just wasn't as engaged. So I'm really glad that with the more information that we have available now, that teens are using that for good, it feels like. And I feel like Marva is definitely one of those people.
I freaking love her. And she's like, but at the same time, I think, I also want to like, sit for a minute with kind of just how real Duke also feels. And in particular, like just kind of his, his growth, I guess, throughout the book, kind of as he, just basically unpacks what political engagement means to him. And I know a lot of kids like that too, who are figuring things out and who, just like the last couple of years, like I think 2016 really pulled the rug out from a lot of people. And I think 2020 is kind of doing that again for a lot of people. Sometimes people who were a little too young in like 2016 to kind of understand it at the level that they understand it now, And Duke kind of reminds me maybe of somebody like that. And I know a lot of people like that too. And I'm wondering, just kind of that dynamic between them. I loved seeing kind of the way they kind of engaged with that in a very like authentic way with each other. Is that something you see a lot? Is that something you want to see kind of in the way, and not just Gen Z here, but just in general, in the way we talk to each other and kind of try to inspire each other to engage more deeply?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not like either character because, you know, I've said like, oh, I'm like a little bit like Marva. I'm a little bit like Duke. I would guess, I don't want to speak for you, but probably that when you write, a little bit of yourself makes it into several of your characters. I never really write fan fiction of myself because that just feels like too close to home. But I do see a little bit of myself in both of them. And so, yeah, I really wanted to play off of that. Like, you know, here is this woman who, or this young woman who is super engaged and knows what she wants. She shows up to the polls, like with her sample ballot filled out, which is only something that, you know, I started doing like as an adult, as an older adult.
This year with the sample ballot. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, yeah. Where I'm like, oh my God, like that's only something I realized I should have been doing like 4 years ago. But and then Duke comes from a family that's like super politically engaged, and you know his older brother was an activist who was really well known around their community, and he was unfortunately shot, you know, in the midst of sort of his activism among especially like gun control. And then his parents are, you know, also really like politically engaged, just as in like telling their kids that they have to, you know, that they have to get out there and make their voice heard. So he's got a younger sister named Ida, who is sort of, so Duke's in the middle. And then there was his older brother, Julian, who died. And then Ida, his little sister, is sort of, he realizes, oh, she's like a mini Julian. And he feels sort of left out because, you know, he's like a drummer in a band, and he just feels like that's kind of like his one thing, which sort of also is his way of dealing with the grief over his brother dying. And essentially he's still grieving his older brother. And, you know, he knows at the beginning of the book, he's like, the best way I can honor Julian is to just get out there and vote. But he also like feels like it's, you know, his mom is like, you're going to go vote, right? You're taking your sister with you. And so it is a responsibility that he feels. And then as the book goes on and he starts talking to Marva and sort of thinking about his brother and just about his family and all the changes that they've gone through since his brother died, he starts to realize like ways that he can help and get involved that are comfortable with him. And so, or comfortable to him. And so I sort of wanted to show that, you know, it doesn't have to look the same way for everybody to get involved and to sort of make their voice heard and help implement change. There are so many different ways you can do it. Like at one point, Marva talks about how she doesn't go to protests because she's kind of worried about getting confrontational. Sadly, that is me. That is part of me. And I've always felt that it was sort of like a failure on my part to not go out and protest, you know, with the people, because that is one of the biggest things that's, you know, implemented change in our country. But there are other ways to get involved. So, you know, well, that's part of my fear of like being in a big crowd and sort of like getting into it with like counter protesters. Like, I think that a strength is that I use that voice to talk to people in real life about things. So I'm not afraid to challenge people when they say things that may be offensive or unresearched or anything like that. So I just think like thinking of all those different ways that you can make your voice heard and help. I really think that like no thing is too small as long as you're trying. So I hope that was like something that, you know, was able to sort of convey with showing that as they get to know each other and as they look back over sort of what they've already done and, you know, what they plan to do in the future.
Yeah, and to me, like, I definitely got that message from the book. And I also think that's maybe the single most important take-home message from any book for 2020, like, right? Because this, like, we started out this year probably thinking that activism was going to look very different than it does right now. And of course that makes me like, you know, I'm like so curious about the process for this book because you know, and like every time I'm in an event, because I know that this is not like necessarily, maybe everybody here knows this, so I'm sorry if this is like obvious information, but publishing timelines are like pretty unexpectedly long sometimes if you're not familiar with them. So there were a lot of things you know, about this moment when the book is releasing that like didn't exist or couldn't have existed when you were writing it, and yet it is the most like relevant book. Like you know, it's almost unbelievable. It's like you were psychic, maybe in some ways, you know, the fact that they're like walking around in person everywhere. But yeah, like kind of where were you when you wrote it? What's it like seeing it come out now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad I wasn't psychic, because while I'm like a total homebody and love being home, if I had been told that I would spend months in my apartment in 2020, I don't think that would have been the greatest way to move forward. But yeah, so I started writing it, let's say kind of late 2018, really early 2019. And so, you know, we were definitely already dealing with a lot of damage, you know, from my perspective of the new administration. And, you know, I try to be optimistic, but you just don't know what's going to happen. And so it's like wondering, at the time, the 2020 election felt so far off, and we had just gotten through the midterms, and, you know, so there was a little bit of hope there for sure, but it still felt so far off at the time. And now I'm just like, I can't believe it's like in a few months, and like what's going on. And it is surprising. It's I guess in a way it's kind of sad, because it feels like these problems, a lot of these issues are very evergreen. Like even in the book, Marva says at one point, like, you know, voting to try to like correct some of these issues that, you know, my parents say that we've been fighting for decades. And it's like these things should have been solved decades ago. And it's like, yeah, why are we still here? Why is this book that talks about voter suppression, you know, and all of that, like still relevant in 2020? But sadly it is. So it's really, really strange to me. I thought people would talk about it from like, in the point of view of like, oh, it's timely, it's relevant because it's 2020 and we have a presidential election coming out. And even though this doesn't speak specifically to any candidates or, you know, anything like that, I thought that was going to be most of it. But I've been really impressed by like how people have been educating themselves on issues, you know, ahead of reading this book, or people who've read it have already talked to me about like, you know, I didn't know about some of these issues, and they really opened my eyes. And now I see that this is something that I needed to have been paying attention to, and that is more relevant. So in a way, it kind of feels like, although the pandemic has been, you know, really horrible and of course awful, and I would never wish it on anyone, you know, going back and all of that. But I do feel, because people maybe have more time at home and more time to pay attention to things, just sort of like the protests that have started after George Floyd's death, I feel like people are paying more attention to the issues that lead to that have surrounded that for decades, that people have been dealing with. So yeah, it's strange. I did not expect it to be that timely from that point of view, but it's been nice. You know, I'm not a person who really, I'm on social media, but I don't really like to talk much on there. I just really like to like promote my friends and tell people when I have like a book coming out if they're interested in it. But so for me, the best way for me to sort of make my voice heard, if it's not in person, talking to someone one-on-one or to a group, is to write it down. So to me, I'm like, okay, this feels like the best contribution I could have given in 2020. And again, I'm like sad that it is so timely and so important right now, but I feel just really lucky, you know, that it is getting people thinking, and that I don't know, that people are really taking note of it, and, you know, learning lessons and learning to speak up and all of that from it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's, I mean, you know, and kind of speaking, like specifically, you know, here in Georgia for a minute, which I know is like, this being a live event, I'm assuming most of our audience is not necessarily from Georgia, but since, you know, Charis, you know, this is technically your Atlanta event. So, you know, everybody down here is, you know, that like, that's just, you know, one of those conversations that, like, thanks to people like Stacey Abrams and stuff, is just like right there front and center, and for good reason. You know, during the primaries, like this year, you know, I could not stop thinking about your book.
Oh.
It's, I mean, you know, and I found it really comforting to kind of just like, you know, see that like just, you know, it's just such a clear-headed like depiction of kind of the way voter suppression looks in practice, that it was like, okay, we can work with this. Like we know kind of what we're up against, because I think for me at least, because I, you know, was woefully uneducated about like this issue in particular, like, you know, and I know this is true for a lot of people kind of in my community, like out here in the suburbs, you know, you know, when you hear like voter suppression, you think of kind of this, you know, just like almost like a direct statement of like, these groups of people are not allowed to vote, you know, and it's like, kind of happening, but it's like it's happening in kind of a million different ways that you could almost, if you don't know what to look for, just be like, oh, it's just disorganization. But it's like, oh, but it's disorganized in certain districts, you know, and in like certain communities like only have one polling place. And you know, up here in the northern Atlanta suburbs, which, you know, are increasingly purple, but like for a very long time have like skewed conservative and skewed white, these like affluent northern Atlanta suburbs, like I didn't have to wait. You know, I voted a couple days early. I waited a little while, but it was strictly like COVID, and it was like taking a little bit longer because of that. But like, you know, my husband voted on election day. He didn't have to wait in those lines, you know, because nobody was trying to like prevent my community from voting. I hope we proved them wrong. I hope we prove that they should be trying to like, but like, yeah. So like, I'd love to just hear you, talk a little bit about like kind of what voter suppression kind of, you know, just kind of your take on it. So it's like what that looks like in practice, like what types of things like should we look for, know to include under that umbrella, and then what does that look like to in the book as Marva and Duke are kind of going throughout their day.
It's funny, like, so when I think about voter suppression, I think automatically back to like historical, you know, voter suppression. My family is from the South, so my parents grew up in rural Arkansas, and I just, you know, I didn't learn anything about that in school, and then I remember reading up on it finally, you know, or there were probably like a couple of sentences devoted to that, maybe like growing up. But the more I grew up and learned about, oh, like, you know, poll taxes back in the day. So like making people pay a tax just to be able to vote in these rural, like primarily Black, primarily poor communities. They didn't have that, or they had to save up for years just to be able to vote. You know, closing polling places, not holding regular hours. I think that's something that's sort of probably still happening today. I mean, definitely the closing polling places. They also used to have literacy tests back in the day for, again, these communities that were often, you know, sharecropping communities that did not have the same education that the white communities would have in southern states back then. So it's just so much of that stuff that is not necessarily exactly the same, but has sort of transitioned over. So, you know, I live in California, so, you know, we're a very big, very blue state, but we have our pockets of red here as well. And but you don't see it the same way that you would see as the things that are happening in Georgia that are being called out, where it's like, wow, this is, because I was able to get in and I voted early, and I was the only person there, in fact, for the primaries, and which was kind of upsetting, but you know, it was so easy. And I remember even it feels like it's almost ingrained, because I got there and I was like, oh, like I was ready to get my ID out, and they were like, you don't need your ID, and I was like, oh yeah, you shouldn't need your ID. But yeah, it's things like, you know, closing polling places, only having one place available for like multiple neighborhoods where people have to stand in line, or making sure that, you know, people are standing in line and then they don't know if they're going to be able to vote, or sort of, you know, whisperings like, oh, if you're not in by, you know, 8 p.m., like you're not able to vote. Like I remember seeing a tweet, gosh, I think this was from the Kentucky election that just took place recently, but one of the candidates was like tweeting like, please stay in line. You know, it's little things like that that I think people don't understand. Like that's voter suppression, is these rumblings to try any way to try to stop people from voting. So in the book, they deal with the closure of a polling place that affected a lot of like a senior center home. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, but where this whole group of people that really wasn't able to get around, didn't have their own transportation, you know, weren't prepared to travel across town to vote, didn't know until that day that their polling place was closed, only having the polls open when people are not able to get childcare, can't bring their kids, or can't get off work to go vote. You know, it's things like that where it's like, it should, first of all, be a national holiday, and or election day should be a national holiday, and or it should be on a weekend, or, you know, just at times when people can vote. It shouldn't be prohibitive by nature to vote, but it does seem very difficult. Like I'm lucky enough to work from home now, and so I have set my own hours and all that. But I remember, you know, when I was working at an office, and it's like having to get permission and be like, I'm going to be late to work, or I'm going to have to get up super early and go vote before work, or know that I'm going to leave work at night and hope that I can get in before the doors close. It's like, it shouldn't be like that. You know, like in other countries, like voting is compulsory, and it's you're automatically registered to vote as a human. And I really think that's how it should be. But, you know, this country's history has from the beginning not been fair to lots of groups of people, primarily, you know, Southern poor Black people. And I unfortunately just, you know, this book isn't set anywhere in particular. It's set in a fictional town, and not a fictional state, but it's just not set in a particular state. But yeah, it's, you know, it's still that way in a lot of places. And that really baffles and concerns and, you know, upsets me, that just making your voice heard and trying to vote for a candidate that has you and your community's best interests at heart can be so difficult and so prohibitive for so many people.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, it really resonated here. Like it's just, you know, and I can't emphasize enough too, if you're watching this and you like, even if you are not from, you know, kind of a place, you know, I mean, you may not be from the US. It's like a virtual, it's like so incredible that I
right.
love about, but, you know, if, you know, even if that is not the kind of dynamic of your city or town or country, like I wish I could shove this book into everybody's hands, because it's just like this, it like, I feel like you have somehow, like, you're not from here, but you have like managed to put Georgia 2020 into a book, you know? And it's like, and it's so useful. It's like, it's you know, and it kind of, you know, and it speaks to like, just like the power of like fiction to, you know, communicate some really, really important concepts, but in a story. So you're having fun, and like, it's, you know, like you're like, you know, you're not turning the pages because you want to learn about voter suppression. Like you're turning the pages because you're like, yes, you know, and like, that's sort of kind of what, you know, the, I know, let me see if I put it in any way that sounds smarter than it does in my head right now. But like, there's something that I really wanted to bring up, that I like, one of my favorite threads throughout this book, and I wouldn't consider this a spoiler, it's more like a character kind of thing with Marva, is she's got this like activist identity, and she's like the you know, kind of serious activist kid, and she feels a lot of responsibility. She like puts a lot of pressure on herself to kind of you know, just be just doing the work a lot and just kind of like not being frivolous and not being, you know, silly. Or there are certain like things that she doesn't feel like fit with her identity. And like, you know, for her, that's where we get into, you know, kind of the Instagram famous cat. And like, that is a secret, right? Like she's, you know, and I'd love to like hear just your take on kind of, you know, kind of integrating kind of those two parts of her identity. Like she's the serious activist, but she's also like this, you know, she's a teen girl and she, you know, she's got this like whole like super extra thing like going on with her cat. That's maybe my favorite thing on earth. And she struggles with that. And kind of the other piece of this question too is like, you know, there's something so meta too about the fact that like you've written this book that's got all of these like incredibly important serious issues, and you've done it in the form of a rom-com, which is like, you know, to me the ultimate power move. Like, I think like, and it's like a rom-com, it's like a really like shippy rom-com. Like it's like, you know, so I guess yeah, just what kind of, you know, where does that like come from, that you know, kind of push-pull between you know, the joy and the fun and the romance and the just, you know, frivolity, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thanks. It's so funny because for people who are just picking up my books for the first time with this book, I'm like, oh, if you do go back and read my backlist, like this is by far the happiest romance I've ever written. It's usually kind of ends in despair or just sort of ambiguous. So with hopefully lots of fun stuff anyway. But yeah, it was really cool to be able to write like pretty much a rom-com, straight up rom-com, you know, it's just voting elements. Yeah, it was cool. So the internet cat thing was really fun to do. I don't have any cats, unfortunately, but I love cats. I see a picture of a cat and I freak out. Like I see a cat, I want to meet that cat. Like that's how I feel about cats. So putting this cat in there, her name is Selma, whom that's her like kind of her given name is Selma, who's named after, you know, the Selma of Martin Luther King Jr. fame. And so she has that name, but then she kind of wants to give her this other personality when she puts her online. And so she names her Eartha Kitty. And there's a section in the book where she talks about how her dad suggested that name just because she's like this beautiful black, like Maine Coon kitty. And he was like, what about like Eartha Kitty for her name? Haha, wouldn't that be funny? And at first she was like, well, yeah, okay. So Eartha Kitt, the woman, like was like this sex symbol. And, you know, she played Catwoman and, you know, we all know her from that. Why would I name my cat that? And then she does some research on Eartha Kitt and finds out that, you know, Eartha Kitt, the woman, was actually like a huge activist, and really fought for, you know, the rights of not only Black people, she was a Black woman, but also, you know, the rights of especially like the LGBTQ community. And, you know, as someone who also, I don't like using the word ally myself to describe myself as an ally, but as someone who does consider myself an ally of the LGBTQIA plus community, that was really like resonant to me. Like, oh, this woman, like, especially back in like, you know, the 50s and 60s, went out of her way to speak out for a group that had, you know, significantly fewer rights than they do now. And to do that and to get put on like a CIA, you know, watch list essentially at the time was really, to me, really badass, you know? So I just feel like it was sort of like thinking about those multitudes that we all contain. So yes, you can be a sex symbol and an amazing singer and actress and play Catwoman. And you can also be someone who's really fighting for the rights of a lot of underrepresented and marginalized groups, especially at the time that she was fighting for them. I just cannot stress enough how much worse things were back then even. So I kind of wanted to capture some of that. And then, yeah, like Marva feels really like protective of the Eartha Kitty Instagram. It is a secret. And only very few people know that she's behind it, because she's worried that, that once people find out that she has this cat that she loves to like dress up and take photo shoots of and spend, kind of a lot of time on, for strangers, Eartha Kitty's Instagram numbers are in the tens of thousands of followers, I think, maybe even hundreds of thousands. And she's worried that people will see that and just be like, oh, like you have this like dumb little Instagram for your cat and you don't actually care about real issues. And so she's worried that she can't actually be herself and show her fun side, because she's worried that people won't take her seriously, which I think is something that probably all teen girls especially kind of go through, is like not being taken seriously. Like I know, you and I both write teen girls, and I'm sure you see just like offhanded comments from people where they're like, oh, like just comparing anything like bad or silly to being a teenage girl. And I'm like, do you realize what teenage girls are doing and like the power they have, and like just how much they care about things, and how that's not something to be ashamed of. So yeah, I think it's kind of like fighting back against that too. But Marva is worried that she really can't be like that. And for me, yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought of it like that myself. I've always enjoyed rom-coms, but I guess I've never really thought I could write one before, because I sort of like talking about serious topics and, like racism and sexism and like sexuality and all of that stuff. Like I really always enjoy writing about that and really making people come to terms with tough topics. But nobody ever said you can't do that in a rom-com. It's just maybe you're drawing in more readers with that, and people who felt that there wasn't a comfortable way to have those conversations. But like you can pretty much do anything in a book, I think. And so that, yeah, thanks for that question, because it was really refreshing for me to be like, your street cred is like writing this like gritty, serious YA is not gone, just because that is something I was kind of worried about as I started the book. I was like, is this going to be like, I don't think about like my brand really. I mean, have you seen my Instagram? It's like a mess, but but I do. Yeah, I was a little worried. Like I didn't want it to feel like too different from what I write. But everyone who's really read most of my books is like, this is you. It's just kind of couched in a rom-com, and I think we can all use more rom-coms in 2020. I know that I certainly can. So yeah, that's a really great parallel to draw. So thanks for that question. I love that.
Sure. Yeah, I loved it. I don't know. I mean, I didn't even, and also like too, like just the extra layer. Like think about all those layers working too with like Eartha Kitty's name, and just and that is such a thing for teen girls. And I guess like this, this question it may be just too early, too soon after pub date, especially with like warehouse printing issues and stuff. But for you to kind of have a feel for this yet, but like I'm and actually this, like you may kind of have had conversations like this about your backlist too, but like I'm curious to know kind of how people are going to react to Marva versus Duke, and kind of what that's going to look like, because yeah, I think we are sometimes very hard on teen girls. So I mean, and this is even in the context, say it's like a glowing 5-star reveal, like but just kind of as they're kind of responding to the characters and stuff, and who is more likable and who is more relatable. But yeah, it's like we are extremely hard on girls, especially like ambitious, like no BS kind of girls, and particularly girls of color, and particularly Black girls. Like,
yeah, it kind of distills down to like she's sort of what everyone is conditioned to hate in a way. Yeah, I haven't. I mean, 6 books in, I should not be reading my reviews, but I'm not the strongest person when it comes to that. So sometimes I do still do a little skim. And I saw a review, and it was in the minority, I will say, at this point, but it is, still pretty early since the book just came out on Tuesday. But this person was very mad that they skipped school and that to vote. And despite the fact that Marva is like on track, I think, to be valedictorian or at least salutatorian. And that Duke is concerned about missing his calculus test, which is an advanced class for him to be in. So, you know, they were mad about that. And then the same person was also upset that Marva just seemed so angry. And I'm like, I don't know if you really had read the same book that I wrote. Because if you're focused on her anger, why wouldn't she be angry? Like, you know, first of all, she's the Black person in America. And as we are seeing right now in this very moment, there's a lot of reasons to be angry about the way that our community is treated, but also, you know, just looking at historically and specifically, like I was talking about before, the issues around voting rights and voter suppression around Black Americans. It would be, to me, disingenuous to write a book about a Black girl who's focused on voting and not have her show some moments of anger, you know, and she's not here to make you comfortable. She's here to talk about real issues. So yeah, that's been interesting. I'm sure there are plenty more people who have their own opinions to give, and they are very welcome to give them, and reviews are not for writers. But I really have seen a lot of love for Marva, which makes me extremely happy, because yeah, I think, you know, especially in fiction, guys, or not especially, but also in fiction, guys can get away with quite a bit that women do not. And she is, you know, much more, you know, strong-willed and assertive and outspoken than Duke is. And Duke is just kind of like this laid-back, chill drummer guy. Like, of course, he's like a guy you want to hang out with, but we need, you know, Marvas of the world too to sort of set us straight. You know, if we didn't, I don't think we would have any change in the world. So yeah, I'm all for angry teen girls getting things done. Give me more in fiction. I'm ready to write more, because I think that they have a really solid place.
Yeah, I agree. And also Marva's like that sweet spot too. She's not just angry, she's an angry nerd. So kind of like just like this power of and magic of being like an angry nerd, like who knows what she's talking about. Like it's just like, you know, yeah, well, so I wanted to be mindful because I do see we have a couple of questions, but I wanted to ask, if it's okay, one more, and then I will get to audience questions. Because one of the characters who was not my favorite character, but one of the most intriguing characters was Alec, Marva's ex. Mm-hmm. Kind of, and I'm not even gonna like say anything about him. I also don't know kind of how much you want to reveal about him. But I would love to hear kind of, how do you feel about him? Does he kind of, do you know any Alex, either personally or just kind of, you know, just that you interact with online or see or media people? He felt real to me.
Yeah, so Alec is like her, kind of boyfriend, maybe not boyfriend by the end of the book. I don't think that's a spoiler. And so he is white and Marva is Black, and so there is some discussion about dating interracially, and then like Duke's mom is white and Duke's dad is Black, so he's biracial, and so there's a lot of talk about interracial relationships in there, and sort of the navigation of that and what it looks like to the outside world and all of that. And so Alec is like big man on campus at the school that Marva goes to, at her private school. And when she transfers there for high school, it's like a school that goes, I think, from like junior high up, or I honestly forget what I write sometimes, but I think it was like elementary and up or junior high and up. But anyway, she transferred in and people already knew each other. And he was already had been like big man on campus for years. And so they end up getting together, and she's like, oh my God, like here is this guy who's like super engaged. Like I am, like he is politically active, he's active online, like posting all of these calls to action and, supporting movements. I feel like Alec would have certainly have been on the, like posting Black Lives Matter hashtags and everything. But then he starts to sort of either change or show his true colors. And it turns out he's not really on the right side of things. And at the beginning of the book, she's upset in the first chapter because he has committed to not voting because he disagrees with the two-party system. And listen, the two-party system is absolutely not a perfect system. We all know that. But it is such a privilege to be able to say that you're not voting because you don't agree with the system. Because if you can do that, then primarily, not all the time, but for someone like Alec, it's because the system was designed to benefit you. So if you don't have to vote because you don't have anything to change, essentially. So she's really upset with him because he knows how much that means to her. And so then she starts looking back over some of their interactions, times when he has either ignored the way that her identity, is different from his, and how things would be filtered differently for her and would affect her differently, or he's just reveals himself to be quite ignorant to things that, as a self-proclaimed activist, he should have known about. And he sort of gets tired of doing his activist work and is like, I'm tired of being angry. And she's like, well, imagine living as someone who these things are actually affecting. So yeah, he was interesting to write. Again, the way I grew up around, my hometown was like 3% Black in a super, super conservative area. So the first time I voted, I was still living in Missouri, and definitely voted against the majority there, for sure. And knew a lot of people that I was friends with, but that I knew when it came down to it, their politics were not anything that would be beneficial to me. And it's sort of a strange thing where it's like, okay, well, do you just cut these people off because when it comes down to it, they don't have your best interest at heart? Or do you try to see the other side and forgive them and say, well, they treat me differently, or they think I'm different? But like, no, the older, it may be a little harder to do that as a teenager, especially if you're living in an area that's really, that, for me is conservative in a way that doesn't support my own community. It may be harder to pull away because then who are you going to talk to? Like, who are your friends going to be? But as I get older, it's sort of like, no, I don't have to deal with that. Like, or I can have conversations that help maybe someone see the way those actions are affecting me and affecting the world at large. And, it's not like I'm really not out to change minds. I just want people to think, which is really the impetus of any book I write. I'm not here to be didactic or to tell you any which way to think. I think it's usually pretty clear which side I am on of things, but I really just want people to think, because I think when you give people the facts and you give them room to think and explore things on their own, and say, okay, well, like, this didn't affect you, but if you vote this way, or if you support this guy's policies, like, this really endangers me and people who look like me and my family whom you love, and that kind of stuff. I think that can be really helpful to just sort of give people the space to work that out themselves. But yeah, Alec ended up being a big jerk. And I think that's kind of apparent from like the first chapter, but I thought it would really be interesting to sort of see how someone can get involved in like performative activism and how, they can change right before your eyes, or when it comes down to it, they have all the right things to say, but their actions don't mirror their words, which was the case with Alec.
Yeah. I thought that was like absolutely brilliant too. Yeah. Cause it felt so real. And it's just also like, it was such a, an important thread, like with, and I actually can't remember, how, whether Marva ever explicitly said anything to this effect, but like, it is so personal for some of us and so theoretical for some of us. And that is, that is a very challenging dynamic, I think, to kind of try to like communicate across that divide. And just that, but I just thought it was brilliantly. So
thank you.
It's such a good book, you guys.
Thank you so much.
So let me open up this question box. I'm like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So So this is a multiple part question. The first one is, will you read a passage from the book? Yeah, I will say no pressure either way, because I know that I'm a hot mess and am neurotic about pronouncing things wrong.
I'm happy to, if you want me to. Yeah, I didn't, I have been reading, the chapters are pretty short. So yeah, if that's okay to read now. Yeah, I can just read. Is that cool? Okay, I know I usually don't read at this point in the event, but if it's cool, it's pretty short. So this is when Marva starts, when she's gets to the polling place. So this is all from her point of view. I'll just read a couple of pages. All right. I can't believe how long this line is. I don't care how nerdy I look. I can't stop the giant smile that's spreading across my face as more and more people join behind me. I'm at the very front, of course, armed with my first copy of the day and my completed sample ballot, though I know all the candidates and measures I'm choosing by heart. I'll be in and out in 10 minutes. I have this so perfectly timed that I'll still get to school with 20 minutes to spare. I check my phone, but still no text from Alec. What the hell? I guess technically it's my turn to respond, but what he's doing is unacceptable. How can he just change like this when he's been my boyfriend for more than 2 years? I glance behind me to see how the line is shaping up. It's mostly people my parents' age, but there are a few younger ones too. No other high school kids though. I'd like to think that's because they're all coming after school, but I'm not that naive. All that time I spent canvassing, phone banking, and text banking made it crystal clear just how many people want nothing to do with implementing change in this world. The guy about a dozen people back might be my age. He's so tall, though, it's hard to tell. He has light brown skin, close-cropped reddish-brown hair, and big hands that keep drumming a rhythm on his thighs. He's wearing giant black headphones, and I wonder what he's listening to as I turn back around. The front door to the church opens, and a gray-haired woman with a sunny smile props it wide with a doorstop. Morning, folks, and happy election day. The polls are officially open. I swear I get the chills. So that's just a little taste. Thanks for letting me read.
That nerd.
I know, just like she gets the chills for just voting for the first time.
Yeah, oh my God. For her one day. I'm so mad she's fictional though. But so the other parts of this question, and this is such good questions, y'all. Are you able to write during this challenging time with the pandemic, protests, and general political climate? And what are you reading to help keep you grounded? So
that's a great question. Yeah, it's been. I'm curious what your answer will be to this too, Becky. So I have a lot of deadlines coming up, and it has been really, really difficult to write. I feel like I spent the first 2 months of this just fretting. Just checking the news constantly, being what's going on? Trying to get groceries and masks and, sanitary wipes, sorry, not sanitary, Clorox wipes, all that stuff. Yeah. And just trying to figure out being in this new way of living. And then it was oh, I had a book come out at the beginning of March. And then I had, this book come out Tuesday. So it's been book promo and then deadlines and it's been a lot. So I have had trouble writing, but I'm just, deadlines call. So I'm going to have to get through it somehow. So it's been slow, but it's happened. And then I read back over it and I'm oh, this isn't horrible. It was just really difficult at the time. And then reading. So I really love to read nonfiction when I'm feeling upset. I know that a lot of people want to get lost in fictional worlds, especially the worlds of romance or rom-com or, anything that's sort of happy and joyful. But for me, when I get angry, especially around all the protests and, things that are going on, they're great. But the reasoning behind them is really upsetting. I want to have sort of the knowledge to speak to people about the issues that are going on. So you see anyone who's against protests and say they don't help and all of that stuff. I really, really like to just be as informed as possible. And right now I am reading, I'm very late to this, but I'm finally reading it. The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. It came out in 2010. So it's been out there, but it won the Pulitzer Prize, and I have heard nothing but glowing praise about this book ever since it came out, and was just like, sure, it's great, I'll pick it up. But I mean, it is a stunning piece of literature. It's incredible. It's nonfiction, but it's so narrative, and it follows like 3 Black people who were part of the Great Migration. And so it just shows all these different struggles that they went through, and what the South was like and what the migration was like. And I'm still pretty far in. It's like a 500-page book, but it's stunning. So and then I've read some fiction too. So I read Renee Watson's Ways to Make Sunshine, which is so cute. It's like, oh my God, I know. It's like, if you love the Ramona books, this is like, I think sort of inspired by them, Renee has said. And so it's about this sweet little Black girl named Ryan Hart in Portland, Oregon. And it just like, did you read it, Becky? Because it just like,
no, I haven't read that one yet.
My heart swelled. But Renee's
read the Ramona books, but yeah, I grew up on the Ramona books.
Same. Yeah. So I've kind of been like, doing like a mix of like dense, like nonfiction about the struggle, and then, trying to just sort of counterbalance that with some really great, and I know Becky's going to be embarrassed, but I'm going to plug this book. I read this toward the beginning of the pandemic. Yes, No, Maybe So. This book is excellent. It's by Becky and Aisha Saeed, and it's about 2 teens, Jamie and Maya, who go canvassing together. And so this book is a force. And if you like the voting booth, you're interested in this, and you have not read Yes, No, Maybe So, you should definitely read this book. Also check out the New York Times book review that I wrote about it, because every word in there is like so much more than I could say right now, but it's a great book, and it's another really great example of teens getting engaged. And I especially love that. I've gotten a couple of questions recently about like, what can teens who aren't old enough to vote do? Because, they're 18 in my book. And so I think that book is such a great example of ways that you can get involved before you can actually go in and cast a ballot. So I wanted to suggest that.
That's, yeah, I know I speak for Aisha when I just sort of like wave my hands around my face, squeal, and feel pink cheeked. So I know it's weird. It's almost as if it feels like we sat down and like collaborated, and like we were like, okay, we need these books. They're coming out a few months apart from each other, and like, we'll cover this, you cover that. It's like they work so well side by side. Also, I'm just putting it out there that if anybody would like to write crossover double date French fan fiction, like, I'm completely supportive of that.
Oh my God. Oh my God, that would be my first fan fiction. Yeah, do it. Oh my God.
Do it. Fan art. I'd let like that squad, like the 4 of them, like just unstoppable.
Oh my God. I want to hang out with all of them, first of all. So
that's I wouldn't even worry about the election if it was just,
No, I know these kids should literally run the world. So yeah, that would be great.
Let's see. And so this is sort of, I would say this is kind of a related question. Just how have you been refilling your creative well? So we talked a little bit about, and so specifically, and this is from Melissa, so, any movie, shows, or books you'd recommend. So I know we have talked a little bit about books, but what are you watching? Or is there anything else, like, Animal Crossing, or kind of, what do you do to kind of keep centered right now?
Yeah, so I've been trying to get a Nintendo Switch since the pandemic started. Like, I'm so upset. I had never gotten one before because I was worried about my productivity decreasing, because I really love video games, but I have not allowed myself to have a console since I was like a kid. And then I really missed the boat on that, and the Switch is still sold out. So I've been playing Animal Crossing on my iPad. There's like this thing called Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. So it's like this little condensed version of it, I guess, on the iPad. I know. I think it's like totally like same characters, but like pretty different. But it has been like so nice to just like have this game, especially on that version. It feels like it's just like this game about friendship and like helping people. And so I've loved that. I always watch the Real Housewives franchise. I feel like I say this in every event. I know. I like love it. I wish that I didn't, but I love it. That's it. I'm going to watch it all the time. I just finished watching, I binged The Babysitter's Club on Netflix last weekend. Have you watched it, Becky?
I binged the whole thing. Yeah, no, I mean, so we're just about the exact same age too. So
Yeah.
it's like, I'm like completely not surprised to hear that you have already finished The Babysitter's Club. It is,
oh my God.
I thought it was incredible. Like,
yeah.
I
cried as soon as it started because it was so nostalgic. And like, I don't know about you, but I'm assuming you also devoured those books as a kid. And I don't feel like I give enough credit. Like I always talk about Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, who are two of my absolute favorites. But The Babysitter's Club was like huge to me, and I don't think I would be a writer without it. So it was really like special to see that adaptation. I feel like there's one more I'm forgetting. Well, I'm currently watching this show called All American that I think is on the CW, but is on Netflix right now. Taye Diggs is in it, and it's like inspired by a true story, and it's sort of like a kind of rags to riches story. Football. It feels like sort of a version of Friday Night Lights, but like not like that. But it's really, really good. I like it. So that's kind of what I've been watching. I had to get myself out of the reality TV rut, which I love reality TV, but I was like, okay, I have to get back to scripted and sort of like get back into storytelling somehow. So yeah, I feel like
I go through those cycles as well.
Right. It's just, oh my gosh. And then I've just been like cooking and reading poetry and just doing anything to try to get my, like, those creative juices going. But I feel like if you're going to be stuck in the house, like now in history is like the best time ever because there's just so much at our fingertips, I feel really grateful to be able to stream any movie or TV show I want and, buy books that can be shipped directly to my house. And so yeah.
Yeah, no, and I feel that way too. And every time we do a live event and stuff, I'm just like, it is really hard to kind of, to give up those like in-person bookstore events. But there's something really lovely about kind of some of these live events where, you can like panel with authors who you just may not have been in the same city at the same time, and kind of the community watching can be from like all over, and that's little silver lining where we can find it.
Yeah, definitely. I love that it like makes it more accessible, hopefully, for more people. Because we don't always get to travel, like you said, to the cities that we want to. I know someone who grew up in a town where, like, for example, no one ever came for concerts. It's nice to be able to have like that sort of sense of connection. So
here's my follow-up question to part of your previous answer.
Yes.
So this is a little bit, it's like kind of like the Hogwarts house question, but not associated with a transphobic author. And
right.
Since you read The Babysitter's Club, what is your, like, I guess you would call it like babysitter persona? Like which one are you?
Yeah, I think I'm a Stacy. I mean, I've always identified with Stacy. I love her. I just feel like she was like pretty chill, which in my head I'm always just like, but like I think I sort of maybe from what people have told me seem more chill on the outside than I am on the inside. And I really liked her. I feel like even though I grew up in not a rural area, but kind of like suburbanish, Midwest. But I always felt like I had sort of like a big city sensibility. So yeah, I just always really identified with Stacy. And then even in the books, especially like, she has diabetes. And so they talked about it, but she felt really different. Like in the first, she hid it from the rest of the Babysitters Club for a while. And so as someone who grew up feeling like racially different from people in my hometown, like I think I identified with sort of that outsider status that she felt too in the books. Yeah. What about you?
I mean, like forever favorite is Marianne. I'm like,
I knew it.
Thank you for saying I knew it, because I feel like an imposter Marianne though. Like I know I accept this about myself. I know I'm a Mallory, but like I just am trying to be more like Marianne every day. I've made peace with it though, and I actually am extremely fond of Valerie. I love my girl, but like Marianne. Our name Simon's last name is named after Marianne Spear. Like that's like
oh my gosh.
So yeah, oh my gosh, Stacy, I see it.
Okay,
but I didn't know that going into this event because I would have been very intimidated because she's extremely cool. And then when you get to know her, you realize she's like, you know, she's cool, but she's also like cool to hang out with.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stacy's cooler than me, but I like her. I would like to be Stacy's brand of cool.
I think you're cooler than Stacy, and that like that's a good compliment. Like Stacy's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take that.
So that's not like, yeah, I'm not trying to diss Stacy, but okay. So let's see. So okay, so I have 2 more questions here, and I'm gonna let's see. So I'm gonna ask this one. This may be a short answer because there's, you know, like sometimes even if the answer, like even if there's an answer, sometimes it's not something you can announce. But do you have, you know, do you expect to ever see Marva and Duke, you know, kind of in a movie or a TV show? Is that something, you know, that like kind of crosses your mind in general of like kind of dipping a foot into that world to the extent that we have control over it, which we don't.
Right. But, right. Yeah. I mean, you know, as someone who had a super successful, has now had 2 super successful, you know, film and TV adaptations based on your work. Yeah, I don't know. I really hope so. I've had a few people say that they think that it seems like it would translate well to the screen in some way. So I would be really happy if Disney, you know, did that did something with it. Just because I think, you know, as valuable as it is to have the story in a book, I think to see it on the screen would be like even cooler, just to see these teens super invested in voting in a TV or a movie. TV show or a movie. So yeah, I don't have an answer on that, but you know, fingers crossed, send all your good vibes out into the world, please.
Yes. I could see it as both. Actually, I'm like movie or TV, but I could actually really see it as both. It would look sort of different, but and okay, so the last question that I want to end on, and I think this is like I think this is a really, really interesting question, especially for a book like this. Would you ever write a sequel?
You know, interesting. Yeah, I get that question a lot, especially in my other books, because they're super. I mean, I guess the ending of this is kind of open-ended too. You know, they did what they were supposed to do. I hope that isn't too much of a spoiler, but they. You know, it's still kind of open-ended. You don't know who won. You don't know what happened. I guess I'm just spoiling my entire book. I'm sorry. I promise it's like, I think it will still be satisfying if you read it. But I
can confirm. Yeah.
But I think, you know, if you have read my work before, it wouldn't be surprising that a lot of it ends open-endedly. So I do get a lot of questions about, well, I want to know what happens next. I don't have any plans to write a sequel as of now. But gosh, I mean, I would love to spend more time with these 2. It was really, really fun being in that world and writing about them. And also, you know, like they just got to spend a day together in the book. So it would be interesting to see like where they're at after the election and after sort of like this, you know, highly emotionally charged day is over. Like what do Marva and Duke look like outside of that? So yeah, no plans right now, but gosh, that, you know, not opposed to it at all. So.
Yeah. I think it's such a great, I feel like, I don't know that I typically feel this way after reading a book, but like, not only do I want that sequel, but I also want, and I know, like, I understand that this is not YA, but I want them at 40. I want, you know, like, are you so curious? Maybe you already know in your head, but like, yeah, these are characters who, like, when you finish this book, you're like, I'm like dying to know who these kids grow up to be.
Yeah, that's really funny. I know that's probably the sequel I would be most interested in writing is like Duke and Marva at 40. Yeah, totally. Oh my God. Maybe I can write fan fiction of my own work. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah. You might find that fan fiction is already there. Like Oreo Eater 1117, you know.
Oh my God. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I think, is there anything that kind of we didn't cover that is on your mind or kind of you wanted to put out there?
No, I mean, I think the message is there that, so much stuff rests on, this presidential election. If you're in the United States, so much rests on this election, but also in the smaller elections throughout, which you talk about. And yes, no, maybe so. So just try to stay as aware as you can. If check to see if you're registered to vote. If you know you're not, please register and just be ready ahead of time and get out there and do as much as you can. I know it's kind of the world's on fire right now, and things are more difficult than ever, but just use your voice the best way you can, because there's a lot riding on all of this. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but yeah, just use your voice the best you can, and please vote, and please register to vote, and check to see if you are registered. So
yeah, thank you so much. Like this is lovely. It's been extremely just such an honor, and so nice to talk to you. Thank you to everybody who's here hanging out with us. Thank you to ER and Charis for hosting. These Charis events feel so warm and intimate and like the ultimate safe space, and I appreciate that so much. Now more than ever. So
yeah, thank you, Becky, so much, and thank you to Charis and ER for having me. This is so nice. I was hoping to be able to do this in person, but this is absolutely the next best thing. So thank you.
Thank you both. This was really lovely. If you have not yet purchased your copy of The Voting Booth, click on that teal button at the bottom of your screen. And if you would like to make a donation to our nonprofit, which funds all of this work and helps us get to do all this cool stuff on this digital platform, we're going to stay digital through 2020. So all of our events, all of our support groups, everything. If you are new to Charis, please just visit us online at charisbooksandmore.com. You can find out about all the stuff that we're doing. We would love for you to join us on the 16th. We have an event with Lexi Bean and Tobley McSmith that's going to be focusing on transmasculine stories for young people. We're really excited about that, and many more fun things coming up. So check out all of our events, and go ahead and get your book right now, because we know that you're going to want to not only read The Voting Booth, but also share it with friends, talk about it, and maybe have a book club around it. I think that could be really fun.
Oh gosh, it'd be such a good book club.
Yeah, I want to be a fly on that wall.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you both so much. I hope that you continue to be well during this pandemic, and until next time, have a good one.
Thanks so much, everyone.